Hey Wargamers, welcome back to the channel, Death from Above Wargaming. I'm Aaron, coming back at you with some more exciting Battlytics content. So, tonight guys, it's finally here. We're in the semi-finals. We're down to the final four teams. I can't believe it. So we started out, again, with 24 teams. This was a single elimination seeded tournament. And basically what we ended up with after weeks of combat in the Battlytics simulator is these four epic teams. So I'm going to show you here where we're at. We've got, again, the Northeast bracket there we were following, and Thunder Rolls was the champion there of the last review that we did against the Ion Raiders. That was a good one. And Thunder Rolls, they've been on a roll, I guess, so to speak. But they are facing the Artful Dodger. This is a great team, guys. So we're going to look at this matchup tonight. The winner goes on to the final round. And then, of course, the champion of this tournament gets a beautifully painted lance of their choice. There are two available, painted by Colonel Matthew Steiner himself. And those lances are right out of the Game of Armored Combat box set. So very cool. So, guys, first one is coming up right now, but stay tuned later this week because we're also going to be looking at the other matchup, Unicorns of the Apocalypse against the Moon Knights. So, first things first, Thunder Rolls, Artful Dodger. It's coming right up. All right, guys, here we are. Thunder Rolls against the Artful Dodger. Final Four, March Madness. This is exciting. Let's take a look at Thunder Rolls first. Now, we're familiar with this lance. We've been following this team for a while. It just so happened that they are now in this semifinal round. They got the dual Warhammers. I think Warhammers are now sold out everywhere. This is such a great mech, especially the 6D, because it does have so much armor. It deals great damage across the board. It's well costed. Both of these mechs in a direct fire role and at that veteran skill level. Next up, we've got the Crab, CRB-20, as I like to call it, Crab Meat, because this is basically the meat shield. It's set up in a Vanguard role. It runs in, it takes a ton of fire, but this thing has been a linchpin of the overall lance strategy that we've seen to date. And then lastly, the Trebuchet. Now, this is the LRM variant. It's got great damage all the way out to extreme range. It's got okay, but not great armor. And it does have that overheat value of 1. This thing has been inconsistent. Some games it really does well. Other games we've seen it get primed up and destroyed. Will this one perform? I don't know. Just generally looking at the lance metrics, it's fairly well balanced. It does actually a little bit less than what I've seen in terms of average damage, believe it or not. But its ability to work in tandem, all of the units together, has just been astronomical. And this lance has been really doing well in terms of the benchmarks, delivering tons of damage, even though, the numbers, right? You see the Warhammers unable to overheat. The Crab basically can peg 4 damage. Everything else is maxed out at 3. But even still, just the ability to lay down that sustained fire over time has really been, I think, a winning point for this lance. Armor and structure are good. Speed, not too bad. The Trebuchet and the Crab, pretty mobile. The Warhammer's not too slow. So, again, this one's been a contender. Let's see the next lance here. So, the Artful Dodger. So this guy fighting for the Free Worlds League, one of my favorites. And one thing that you'll notice immediately out of the gate is every mech here, every unit is a skill 4 regular. There are no veterans, there are no elites. This is just bare bones, run what you brung. And that allows him to fit 2 mighty awesomes in this lance. It has so far paid off very well. The Artful Dodger, it looks like seeded 6th, actually better than Thunder Rolls. Thunder Rolls seeded 7th in the tournament. The Artful Dodger in round 2 won by a margin of about 2,000 games. So it won 2,000, lost 500. The second game was a little bit closer in the previous round, 1480 to 1016. So interested to see how they do here. But so far, this awesome tandem has been brutal. The Orion, another one of my favorite mechs, near and dear to my heart. It's one of the toughest 70 tonners around. It does great damage, and this is the VA variant, right? So that basically is loaded with SRMs. So it doesn't have any long-range damage. The standard Orion, it's got like a 331 damage profile. This is a 440 with no overheat. So interesting design there. And then also a Trebuchet, but this is also the SRM variant, similar to that Orion, just loaded with SRMs and same damage profile there. So if these mechs can get in close under the cover of those awesomes, that low skill, that regular 4 skill level is really not going to be effective, or rather not affect the outcome too much, because you'll be at such a close range, and delivering 4, or if both of them hit 8 points of damage to a target, could be catastrophic. So excited about this one. Let's talk about roles. So the awesomes are actually set up in different roles, one in a Vanguard role, one in a direct fire role, the Orion in a strike role, Trebuchet in a second line role. So the one thing you'll notice in the key force markers there in the green on the right is the armor. 7 as average, right? I mean, that's really, really high. These mechs just packing it in. And then the structure also pretty high as well. Only that Trebuchet is running, 4-4. Everything else is an 8-6 in terms of armor and structure. Speed a little bit under par there. Most of the mechs are slow, right? The awesome's very slow. So, that's going to play a big part. Can they get into optimal range? Are they going to get outgunned quickly? We'll see. But this lance, again, very well designed, and it's interesting, the strategy here behind the Artful Dodger's lance, really looking to just pack out as much armor as possible, not really focusing on upgunning in terms of skill, fitting the biggest, meanest, nastiest things he could. So let's see, guys. Let's take a look at the metrics. All right, guys, so here we are, Thunder rolls. Let's see how they did in this particular matchup. So the rated versus actual damage, the rated damage remaining unchanged from prior, obviously, as the mechs, the rolls, all that is locked in. So the damage that these mechs are able to do, that's fixed. And that's in those transparent bars. The solid bars will change from matchup to matchup based on what happens in the simulator. So what do we see? Well, we see that there's pretty decent extreme range damage happening in the neighborhood of about 10% of the overall damage dealt. Long range, exceptional at about 30%, and then medium range at 40%, short, underperforming. So right out of the gate, I'm thinking that this lance did a pretty good job of keeping out of short range. And again, that Orion and that Trebuchet in the Artful Dodger's lance really thriving in those two range brackets. So in terms of the battle metrics here, it's an interesting curve. So normally we see Thunder rolls dominating the game, almost in a 2-to-1, but in this one, it's very, very close. So they're just ahead, 52.8% to 47.2%. What you'll notice is they take damage early in that game, around turn 3, turn 4. The Artful Dodger starts to pull ahead, but then Thunder rolls, again, that consistent, sustained damage over time. It's tried and true. It seems to be working here, pumping out on turns 5 and 6, almost 6 damage per turn. In terms of survivability, much lower than we've seen, 49%. And you can see by the 4 plots there, or the 4 lines on the plot to the right, I'm only going to guess it's the crab. There's one that just plummets at turn 4 or 5. By turn 6, it looks pretty much dead. The rest of them, though, do pretty well. And one of those mechs, I'm going to guess it's one of the 2 Warhammers, hanging out around 90% survivability. So in the center there, I want to direct your attention first to the green icons. Let's look at some of those. Average range was 12.8, so that's consistent with what we're seeing, hanging out at medium to long range mostly. The damage, 31.0, still a great number, but that's actually in line with average damage for what we've been seeing from most lances. In prior games, we saw this lance putting out upwards of 40 damage in 10 turns, and 9 damage, 9 pips in a game of Alpha Strike is substantial. They're taking a little bit less, 27.7 pips. They're dealing slightly more criticals than they're taking, but again, very narrow margins here. Not enough to, for me to really say this lance is going to win. So we're going to have to dig in a little bit deeper and see what happens. So overall here in the center, what's happening? It's a scrum for sure. You've got the Warhammers and the Trebuchet tightly deployed there on their left flank. The Crab is deployed slightly south of that. That Crab is making its way in hard and fast. The Warhammers, you can see they're doing some crazy flanking maneuvers. Actually, it looks like that one Warhammer heads back to the deployment zone, probably to kite that Trebuchet a little bit and keep it at range. And then the Trebuchet on the Thunder Roll side is basically hanging out in that central region. Looks like it's laying in damage there. So in terms of efficiency analysis, this land's pegged in at 101.5%. So very good. Now, if you remember in some of the prior games, Thunder Rolls, we saw them much, much higher. So you can see what a different matchup or a very strong lance or a tough comp will do in terms of efficiency numbers. So this was a much harder matchup for this particular lance. So the Artful Dodger definitely giving them a run for their money. The Warhammer's performing above par. The Crab doing what the Crab does, and the Trebuchet slightly under average. And we saw that Trebuchet above and below the average mark. This time, not doing as well as some of the prior games. This Warhammer 60. So both of these are basically same role, same skill level. Great mechs, definitely great mechs. I just ordered actually Catalyst. They put the box sets up for sale. I just grabbed 2 Battle Lances because I want to run 2 Warhammers too, guys. It's the cool thing to do now. Everyone's doing it. So anyway, in the battle metrics here, what do we got? Well, this Warhammer doing very well early in the game, and then it looks like it picks up some fire and gets primed up. Again, this is not as easy going for this lance as it was in prior games. This mech seeing critical hits coming in late in the game. It's seeing, only 16.3% of the overall damage. I say only, but it's still very good, just not as good as in some of the prior games. And it's taking substantially more, 15.7%. So this mech had overall survivability of about 51%, so 50-50. Half the games it was dead at the end of the game, half the games it was still alive, but just barely. Efficiency analysis is interesting. So this one kind of spikes up early in the game. Looks like it gets, again, some early game damage in, and then sort of drops a little bit, and then it starts to come back. So it is underperforming. If you notice the white dotted line, if we go back to the left on the battle metrics, you can see that it underperforms a little bit around turn 4, which accounts for that dip. But I'm not really sure what that is per se. Again, it could just be the fact that if you look at the sort of the radar in the center, it does have to sort of back out. It does take a lot of fire. So I'm suspecting that, once that turn 5, turn 6 comes in, it's backing out, but it's getting back at range early on the game. Not really sure. It's just not able to connect maybe. But anyway, all that said, so this thing overall doing real good, 117%. It's not bad. Let's take a look at the other Warhammer. Now this one, so there's always, the Warhammers, there's always one that gets beat up and the other one that just runs around and shoots everything. This is the one that gets to run around and shoot everything. It's doing almost 20% of the damage. And you can see how different the battle metrics look. It's only taking 6% of the damage, surviving 90% of the time. And it barely takes any crits. So not bad. 0.5 crits per game. It's dealing out 2.3. 11.6 damage dealt to 3.5 taken. Very, very good. So this one, though, it's an interesting pattern on the radar, and a lot of the ones that I looked at, it was very similar. The Warhammers kind of move up the center, and then they'll take opposite flanks, or sometimes they'll take the same flank depending on where those awesomes go. And they're just raining in fire. They're trying to keep their distance. They're happy to stay at long range and do damage rather than closing to medium for that extra pip. So overall, not bad. And that's, again, you may look at it and say, well, they do more damage at medium. Yeah, but if they're staying at long, that Orion and the other Trebuchet, right, the Artful Dodger's Trebuchet, they can't do anything back. So you're doing 2 and taking none in retaliation. So, smart play here by the AI, I think. The efficiency for this mech at 137.9%. The Crab, Crab Meat, what happened here? So Crab Meat's doing what Crab Meat does. I mean, this thing has awful metrics in every single battle, but I really think the wins are squarely attributed to the meat shield that is this particular mech. It runs right up the gut. It runs in the middle of their formation. It's like, woohoo! And it just gets absolutely blown to pieces. But it's doing its job. It's soaking up, 5 11, whatever it is, 9 points of damage, 5 and 4. I think I could do that math in my head. So it's soaking up 9 points of damage. It's taking 16.2% of the overall incoming fire. And it's managing to put a couple of points downfield, on average about 4 points, 3.8 to be precise. Never quite getting into short range, so it's basically getting a couple of shots off at medium, maybe overheating a little bit, but that's about that. Barely surviving 1.1% of the games it's alive. By turn 4, turn 5, it's already taking critical hits, and the efficiency at 66.8%. But you can see, again, turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, that efficiency score actually very good. So if I drill into that, at turn 5 where it peaks, it's at 149.6% efficiency for that turn. So that tells me, this thing is really doing its job. It's just, it's not surviving because it's got all the heat on it. All right, Trebuchet, how did this thing do? Not bad. 9.8% of the damage, 9.2% taken. Efficiency was 84.3%. So overall, this thing did fairly consistent damage throughout the game. You can see it just kind of hovers around the middle, taking pot shots, shots of opportunity. It's a 50-50 survival, 53% to be precise. Critical hits come on late in the game. It's on average taking 1.4 crits per game. That's not terrible. And those really aren't coming on until turn 9. So this thing isn't like getting crippled. And what's interesting is we saw this pattern before. It takes some damage early on in the game. And then, these mechs have to switch off to the crab because the thing is right up in their face. It's dealing damage. It's a bigger threat. So interesting to kind of see, again, how this Lance comp works together. Now, let's take a look at the Artful Dodger. All right, here we are, the Artful Dodger. Can they dethrone Thunder Rolls here? Tropic Thunder, as I like to call them. So anyway, I was told by the Lance creator that apparently Rolling Thunder is a canon unit somewhere, which is why he didn't pick the name. But you could have fooled me. I don't know. You can tell me anything. There's so much BattleTech lore out there, I lose track of it. But anyway, on to the Artful Dodger. I really like this Lance. When he submitted this Lance, I was like, I wonder how this thing's going to do, because it was sort of clever. And frankly, like in a small points game like this, you can very much get away with, running skill 4 pilots and just stacking the meat. These were not fragile mechs, right? The strategy was sound. You can't just run skill 4 on anything and expect to do well. But the selection of mechs, I think, was really brilliant, because these things can absorb a bunch of fire. It's okay if they miss at range a lot, because they'll still be alive by the time they get into medium range, which they were. So let's look at the rated versus actual damage real quick. Performing at par almost for extreme range. Performing at par almost for long range. Again, this is mind-blowing considering their skill 4. And then exceeding damage expectations at medium range. Pretty interesting. So the battle metrics show us that they jumped ahead early on turn 4. And then they were just a little bit, right? A little bit under Thunder Rolls. They almost follow that same trend line, that same degradation down. But they're just doing maybe like a half a point, maybe 0.75 points a turn less. But it adds up, right? So they ended up with 47.2% of the damage. And they took 52.8%. But again, they have so much armor, I'm not really sure that small margin is enough for Thunder Rolls to pull out a win here. The Artful Dodger did only have a survivability of 45.8%. That's sort of your blended average across the mechs. The chart, looks very similar. There's a sacrificial lamb. There's one mech that barely gets touched, and there's 2 that are somewhere in the middle. Overall, the Lance stayed at about 12.6 inches in terms of average range. Now, this is a problem because you've got an Orion and you've got a Trebuchet that don't have any long-range capabilities. I don't think that's what this Lance wanted to see, and I bet you their damage numbers would be higher if they were able to close that gap. But again, you've got Warhammers that are just as fast as the Orion. The Trebuchet is only slightly faster, so they were able to kite a little bit, which we see. So anyway, average damage across the game is 27.7 per game. That's not bad. They took 31. Crits, again, on par. They dealt 5.8. They took 6.3. Efficiency for this Lance was almost 93%. That's good, right? You can't look at 101 and 93 and be like, oh, 101's a lot better. They're very, very close. So again, overall, what I see, pretty solid. decent efficiency. The Awesomes pretty much performing to spec. The Orion outperforming. So interested to look at that individual breakdown. And then that Trebuchet, very similar to the other one, just not doing so hot. That one likely is the one that ended up running in and dying, much like old crab meat. So let's see what happens here. Let's dive into the individual mechs. We'll start out with it's like the Mario twins. It's like awesome A and awesome B. So we'll start out with the first the first awesome. All right, so this was the one that was in a Vanguard role. So what will be interesting about what will be interesting here is to compare, awesome A to awesome B, because they're in very different roles, right? Everything else is the same. So this Vanguard awesome did 12.6% of the damage, took 16.1. 12.5 is like your average, if you were to divide the pie up evenly. But this mech did cost 13% of the overall PV pool. In terms of the battle metrics and sort of the area plot there, this was one of the key contributors to that early game damage. And you can see later in the game, this thing gets primed up and eventually taken down. What's interesting is some games, you can see that little red area in turn 2 pop up. There are some games where I guess this thing got dinged early, and I'm not sure, maybe like the Trebuchet threw some long-range fire at it, or something along those lines. But overall, I don't see anything too crazy here. The dotted white line representing the average damage, this awesome pretty much mirrors that fairly closely. Survivability 58.8%, so not bad. And remember, this is the one, if you look at the radar in the middle, this is the one that's basically running in the middle and taking some fire. And you can see it does that interesting, sort of loop-de-loop at the end there. In this game, it looks like it survived 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It looks like it survived all 10 turns. So maybe it was looping around to get in a firefight with that crab or take out, one of the Warhammers or something along those lines. But anyway, critical hits really doesn't see much until very, very late game. And on average, it was like turn 10, basically, that it started taking crits. But throughout the whole, the 2,500 simulations, 1.6 criticals per game. So, for example, the armor degradation, just to clear it up, shows you that it starts taking crits on turn 10. But if it's the primary target, which based on the metrics, it looks like it was, you're going to rack up multiple crits per turn. So anyway, efficiency, almost 97%. It's really good. Can't ask for more than that. Now the other awesome, which is in a direct fire role, just doing much better. So this one in particular, dealing out only 11.3% of the damage, but taking 1.8%. So interesting, it did less damage than the Vanguard counterpart, but took substantially less as well, like substantially less. But if you look at the efficiency, only 87%. So even though the other one ran in and, got a face full of lead, it actually was, better bang for the buck because it was able to connect more and do more damage. I'm not really sure why this mech was unable to deliver more damage. It survived 99.2% of the time. What I'm looking at is the average range of 19.8. So that's okay. That's long range, right? In the 1-to-1 rules, 21 inches your long range. It's doing 3 damage, but I'm wondering if in that skill 4 bracket with a direct fire, if it was the wrong roll for this mech. Direct fire tells the AI, like, you want to protect this mech, you want to keep it, at medium and long range, right? You want to keep some space. I wonder if the mods were too high and this thing wasn't able to connect. I would have to dig in and see. But only did 6.6 damage per game. So again, that's only, rounding up 7 pips, but it only took 1. So I don't know. If I had to change something, I think I would put this in a Vanguard role. So it kind of goes to show you, when I read through the comments as best as I can, a lot of speculation around the direct fire role being a silver bullet. It's not, right? It is all about the lance comp. So this one did really well in terms of surviving, but again, a little lackluster on the damage side. So the Orion, how did this thing do? Man, I mean, this thing, 8 bullets and dealt out the damage. 17% of the overall damage was dealt here by the Orion. Now, if I go back, the only thing that outperformed it was one of the Warhammers. The other Warhammer was at 16.8%. So this thing, this Orion, it's competing up there with the big boys. Survivability, 25.3%. It's a huge threat. But, you know, and again, you're talking about dealing 14 pips of damage to this thing. That's so much you have to eat through just to wipe the damage off the board. And it did it really well. So it got into medium range, 8.3 inches. Was able to deal 10 points of damage on average a game. So it's like 2.5 shots, basically, it was able to connect with. It took 12.2 on average. And it certainly took more criticals than it was able to deal out. So if you look at the armor degradation, looks like just a little bit before turn 8 is where you start generating crits, right, where you're in the structure. Efficiency, though, was very good, 130.5 on this particular mech. Similar to those awesomes, this mech took up 13% of the overall PV on the table. So yeah, I mean, overall, I'm not disappointed with the performance of this Orion. So let's take a look at this last mech here, the Trebuchet 5S. So this is the SRM loadout. So this one looks similar to the Crab in that, it runs in and dies. However, this one was deployed in a second line roll, which is interesting. So what does that mean? Well, second line basically means it slow rolls it for the first couple turns and then it runs in. I mean, that's good for, like a mech like a Catapult or something like that. I think the intention here of the Lance designer, which I don't disagree with it, is, let the other mechs go in and draw some fire and then send this Trebuchet in. I think what didn't really work out as well as expected is, one, the crab was running in full bore, and it sort of forced that Trebuchet outside and in. It took it out of the fight maybe a little bit in terms of range, but the Trebuchet very fast. Can sprint 8 inches. It can cut across the board pretty quickly. But yeah, I'm not sure it was able to do quite as much damage as the Lance designer intended. This thing only delivering 3.7 points. So in some games, not really doing a full 4 points. Took 8.3. Again, lightly armored. Was already in structure by turn 4. And then didn't survive at all. 0%. This thing was dead all the time. 2,500 games, survived none. So efficiency analysis puts this mech at 57.4. It's definitely like, C- D range. Not real great. I think if I were to do something with this mech, I think skill 4 is correct. Man, I would jam this thing in a pursuit roll and just let it run up the middle. Or maybe even a strike roll and start it outside and have it, rush in. Kind of like Crab style. Let your other mechs get into position. And I think if maybe the other two awesomes, both of them were in a Vanguard roll, it would have got pretty messy pretty quick. But at the end of the day, remember, guys, this is razor-thin margins here. This could be anybody's game. We saw 2 good-performing mechs in each Lance. We saw 2 mediocre-performing mechs in each Lance. I don't know. Let's see. So, guys, stay tuned. The final analysis here, the results summary, it's coming right up. Who is going to move on to the final round? I can't even deal with the pressure. Let's take a look at some of the key force markers. So, dark green line, Artful Dodger. The light green line is Thunder Rolls. So, what do we got? Skill. So Thunder Rolls handedly, right? Better skill. In terms of damage, though, the Artful Dodger really outperforming. In terms of armor, Artful Dodger outperforming. In terms of structure, Artful Dodger outperforming. In terms of speed, Artful Dodger underperforming. Why is this important? Let me tell you why. So they do slightly more damage, but they're slower and they have worse skill. So that means that they're dealing, on average, with a much worse chance to hit. You look at the Battlytics statistics on the left-hand side, guys. Thunder Rolls landing 60% of their shots. Artful Dodger only landing 42% of their shots. That's substantial, right? Means, that's a big difference. So, what else is interesting though here, guys, is damage dealt. So Thunder Rolls, obviously, as we saw, doing more damage, 31 to 27.7. Thunder Rolls dealing more critical hits. We just talked about accuracy, but look at the kills. Thunder Rolls only able, on average, in an average 10-turn game, able to take down 1.5 mechs. That's the Trebuchet and half of something else. The Artful Dodger able to take down 2.7 mechs, and we know which ones they were. The Crab and the Trebuchet, and then 0.7 of a Warhammer. So, again, not clear who's going to win this one. So Battlemetrics, again, just to refresh, right? Thunder Rolls taking more damage early in the game. Artful Dodger outperforming there, but then Thunder Rolls catching up, being able to outperform late in the game. Let's jump over to the right to the survivability. Very, very close. So the basically 49% here, guys. 49% for the Thunder Rolls Lance, 45.8% for the Artful Dodger. Again, very close, but Thunder Rolls just slightly better survivability. And it's amazing to me because, again, you're looking at more kills per game and all this other stuff, but the overall, again, the survivability by mech was a little bit lower there. So what we can see here is there's that drop at turn 4, turn 5. That's I'm looking at the whiter line. That is that's Thunder Rolls. That's where the Crab dies pretty much every time. And then slowly you see a degradation of the gray line fall below the white line. So blended survivability, Thunder Rolls did better. Earlier in the game, Artful Dodger did better, right? And that's again, that's reflected in those battle metrics. So the Artful Dodger's coming out strong. They're getting that crab kill early in the game. But over time, they're getting whittled away. Their survivability is dropping. We talked about efficiency in terms of bang for buck. Thunder Rolls a little bit higher there, but both lances, I think, doing really well. In terms of overall performance, both Warhammers, I mean, doing fantastic. The Orion doing really, really well as well. So what happened, guys? Let's talk about it. There it is, guys. Win-loss draws. Thunder Rolls able to pull out 52% of the wins, just barely eking out a victory over the Artful Dodger. So it was crazy, and I dug into the numbers because I wanted to make sure, especially in the final round. But anytime I see it like this close, I take a second look. And what really blew my mind is the number of kills and the overall wins. But what happens is in the engine, it basically caps the game at 10 turns. It's a lot of the way missions end as well. Especially in the Battle of Tuckett, and of course all of our DFA missions are capped at 10 turns. So game ends at 10 turns. Sometimes all the mechs on the Op 4 are dead. Other times they're not. Most of the time there's mechs left on the table. So how do you determine who wins that battle, right? So the engine basically looks at every mech. How much armor do you have, right? What's the damage output you can do? It looks at all of these different factors to basically determine the effectiveness, the remaining effectiveness of a given mech in its current state. So, if you have an awesome with 1 pip of armor left, 1 pip of structure, I should say, and you've got a Locust, maybe a Locust is a bad example, but you've got a Crab or something that's actually, dangerous, and it's got full armor, full structure, and doesn't have any, any critical hits. I mean, the engine's going to say that Crab's definitely going to win that fight, right? It sort of extrapolates out, how that battle is going to go. And so many of these, I think, ended like that, where you're left with a bunch of mechs on the Artful Dodger side that are just crippled. They're just absolutely wrecked. They're unable to deliver damage, or, because we saw that in the critical hits, the accuracy and all of these things, like, or they're just basically set up to the point where you've got 2 fresh Warhammers against a couple of banged up awesomes, and the Warhammers are going to win that fight because they're faster, they can kite, as we saw in the radar map. So it was a close one. I mean, it really was. And congratulations to both teams. The Artful Dodger, brilliant lance design, and Thunder Rolls, in the final round. I'm sure we're going to see comments all about that. But this is going to be a good one. So I'm looking over at my bracket. Unicorns of the Apocalypse, Moon Knights, they're on the other side of the fence. One of those two teams, and both of them are very good, one of those two teams is going to be facing down Thunder Rolls. So guys, that's it. That's all I got. I hope you enjoyed this analysis. I'm really excited about being here in the semifinals already. This is pretty cool. So, couple of announcements, guys. If you do want to get more involved, you can come on over to Patreon. You can join for as little as $1 a month, get you, in on the conversations, post up every now and then. And of course, it helps out the channel. It's $1 a month. We also have a $5 and $10 tier, and those unlock some more premium benefits, including access to things like our digital toolkit. You can get involved in polls, and most excitingly, you can participate in things just like this really cool Battlytics tournament. And if you don't want to contribute on Patreon, that's perfectly fine. Of course, we appreciate you watching, but please don't forget to click that subscribe button. That also helps out the channel tremendously. We're on our march to 5,000 subscribers. This is a big deal. So if you guys haven't subscribed, please do so. But that's all I got. So guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. And of course, stay tuned. Always great stuff coming from Death from Above Wargaming. Have a good night.